Lord Prescott, great to see you here. What would you say is the critical difference between Kyoto, which you were a leading light at, and the situation now in 2015?
Very different, but much more progressed. At Kyoto, we were governments. I was the Deputy Prime Minister. We were defending the science, the connection of cutting down greenhouse gas emissions to do that. Now, of course, it's more accepted. It's not the 40 countries at Kyoto, it's 190 countries. The science is much clearer, and now is the case. Not only you find the agreement, and the leaders now recognize they have a bigger role to play, but it's how do you implement what they agree here in Paris. That's where the legislator, there's more legislators here and civic society than we had at Kyoto. They now know it's their job to see that those promises are carried out, and there's a lot of them. And governments go shifting sideways. You need the legislature strengthened. I would bring in a climate change act to strengthen them, commit them within the legal framework, a domestic one, so it strengthens their implementations of what governments promise now. Well, in 4 or 5 times might not be the government. Legislators must step in. That's the fundamental difference.
And is there a role for the public?
Oh yes, I mean, because the public are not yet convinced. I mean, NGOs have played a remarkable part. They're convinced, but we've got to get over to the public. So that's a job for those in the civic, volunteer sector. The solutions lie with them. It's bottom up. We were the first as parliamentarians to say, you must get the power at the level to them to know how serious the threat is to the public, and at the same time to make sure government recognise it has to be implemented. Unpopular decisions sometimes. It needs to have the courage to think globally and act nationally.
One last question, Lord President, before I let you go. What is there about renewables that makes it so progressive? What is radically different about renewables? It's not just a number.
That's the major change. Look, growth, which they talk about at the conferences, was thought to be limited by climate change. In Britain, we showed with the climate change that didn't happen. We had growth, we had jobs, and we had a reducing greenhouse gases. So that is the fundamental change. Renewables have come on in such a way and growing so phenomenally and cost reducing, it will totally undermine the concept that's caused most of this gas, oil and coal. So renewables will make a fundamental change. And the first thing we should do is stop paying these billions of pounds in subsidies to coal and oil. And in my country, we fought an election on the basis we'd reduce energy prices, reduce the damn subsidies, go for renewables. Cheaper is better, and it's a global solution. And to hear these developing countries now saying, we are working for renewables, all of a sudden, instead of begging for money to help them transform the economy, funny enough, the market's going to do it, because the renewable technology and the renewables is a fundamental change from Kyoto. Well, we were in government when we brought in the Climate Change Act. Let me give you a little tale on it. Tony Blair, and I was responsible for bringing it in, rang me to tell me that he was now about, under law, to introduce a Climate Change Act. So industry had to get rid of their inefficiencies, by the way, that's a big thing here now, and be able to produce at a cheaper price. The industry found that indeed that the efficiencies were beneficial to them and didn't cost them. So when Tony Blair says we've got a Climate Change Act, I said, well, you mean an energy tax? He said, no, we don't talk about tax, John. That's one of the problems. They always see the climate change. How much is it going to cost you? What you're doing now in this way is looking at it in a different way again. Politicians then get great pressures. Government gets pressures. And in my speech yesterday, I tried to say, as a parliamentarian for 40 years, I know too well how you can build up a protest movement, and then the national interests, say the big companies who don't want what's being proposed, will pressure government, and government will back down. Legislators have got to say, hang on, we've got a global commitment here, and we wrote it into the law. So when Australia passed a Climate Change Act, the next Australian government couldn't get rid of it because it required a parliamentary majority. I think Cameron would like to get rid of it, because most of what he does on climate he calls green crap. But he can't, because you need parliament. So legislation needs to have the tools to resist those big pressures. And the one that worries me most, when you lead these kind of revolutions in Parliament, government usually come along and say they're very impressed with you, like to join government. Usually the protest then collapses. So we've got to get this global hand on it. The legislators are now in the seat, start using it in a national way to fit into your global requirements. That means legislators will have to legislate whatever they agree here, each national parliament. So, like in Britain, I want to see a Climate Change Act which strengthens the legislation against the central executive. That's quite a fundamental pro. So it's a big challenge for the legislators now. That's why I want an act to protect them in their own parliament, to make sure we carry out what they promised here in Paris.